My name is Amelia Green, and I'm 16 years old, though I've never really felt like I belong in this family. Born to Victoria Green, a woman who could melt stone with her smile, and raised by a father who barely remembered my name, I've always been the odd one out. My older brother, Ethan, was the golden child, the one with perfect grades, the right friends, and the future that everyone expected. Meanwhile, I was the mistake, the quiet one who couldn't fit into their polished world. I spent my childhood wondering if anyone truly saw me, or if I was just the background noise in a picture-perfect family portrait. But that all changed the day I turned 16, when my mother threw a $10 bill in my face and said, "Get out!" Little did I know that was just the beginning of a much bigger storm, and it all started with a sealed envelope I've been hiding for years. The truth was waiting to destroy everything. I stared at the tattered bill in my hand, the cold air of the room stinging my skin as I held it. "You're worth this much," she'd said, her voice cold as ice. My heart had been hammering in my chest, but I kept my face blank. This wasn't the first time she'd thrown something at me. This wasn't the first time she'd tried to push me out. But this was different. This time I had something to say. The envelope sat heavy in my backpack. It felt like 100 pounds. The same envelope I had held onto for 2 long years. I hadn't dared open it. Not until today. Not until this moment. I'd watched Victoria smile, like she had everything under control, the perfect mask for the world to see. But beneath that smile there was only fear. I had learned early on how to read her, the way she'd shift her gaze when she thought no one was looking, the way her shoulders tensed whenever someone mentioned Reed Morrow's name. My real father. That's when the door slammed. The sound of it echoed through the house. I could feel my pulse racing. Outside in the snow was a black SUV. I didn't need to guess who it was. I knew. "Mom," I started, my voice soft. But she was already backing away from me, her eyes darting to the window. She knew it was too late. He knew. The wind howled against the house as I walked toward the front door, each step feeling like it could be my last. My fingers trembled as I reached for the doorknob, the cold metal sending a shock through me. When I opened it, I wasn't surprised to see him standing there. Reed Morrow, my biological father, the man I'd only seen in pictures. He didn't speak. His dark eyes locked onto mine as if he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. "Amelia." His voice was deep, steady, unwavering. "We need to talk." Before I could answer, Victoria stormed toward us, but Reed stepped aside, his eyes not leaving mine. For the first time in my life, I saw her vulnerable, something I hadn't thought was possible. "You've ruined everything," she hissed under her breath. "You're not supposed to know." But I knew. I knew everything. The secrets, the lies, and now the truth. I walked past her and stepped into the cold, snowflakes swirling in the air. The weight of the sealed envelope in my pocket felt like a stone lodged in my chest. This wasn't the moment to back down. Not anymore. "You've been lying to me my whole life," I said, my voice cutting through the cold. Reed didn't flinch. He didn't speak again. He just turned and motioned for me to follow him. I didn't hesitate. The sound of my boots crunching against the snow echoed in the stillness. The thick blanket of snow felt like it was pressing down on me, trapping me in a world where nothing was as it seemed. Victoria's voice trailed behind me, but I couldn't make out the words. It didn't matter. All that mattered now was what was inside that envelope. I stepped into Reed's car, the engine rumbling to life as we drove off into the night. I was leaving everything behind. Then Reed spoke, his voice cutting through the tension. "You're not safe, Amelia. They'll come for you soon. They'll come for both of us." I turned to him, my heart pounding. "Who?" He didn't answer. The look on his face was enough. I knew I was in too deep. We drove in silence for a few more miles, the road ahead disappearing into the blizzard. Then, just as I thought the silence would swallow me whole, Reed finally spoke again. There's something you need to understand. He glanced at me, his face hardening. It's not just about you. You've been part of something bigger than you ever knew. And now you're in danger. I stared at him, my mind racing. What do you mean? You'll find out soon enough. But trust me, the truth will come for you. He paused, eyes darkening. And when it does, nothing will ever be the same again. I never should have opened that envelope, I thought to myself. But now that I have, I can't close it again. The snow whipped against the windows of the car as Reed drove in silence, the world outside a blur of white. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but this wasn't it. The truth, my real identity, had been handed to me like a ticking bomb. And now, I was running with the fuse already burning. I didn't know who to trust anymore. Reed's face was calm, his hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. But I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, checking for someone. You're safe now, he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. For now. That's all I had. The silence was suffocating. I wanted answers, but I couldn't bring myself to ask. Every time I opened my mouth, the weight of the truth felt heavier. The envelope I'd handed to my mother wasn't just a legal document. It was the key to everything I never knew about myself. And it had cost me the last thread of whatever family I thought I had left. Reed's car slowed as we reached a small cabin hidden in the woods, the lights dim and isolated, as if it had been waiting for us. He parked and turned to me. Get out. We'll talk inside. I hesitated but followed him, stepping into the biting cold. The cabin door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room with a single lamp hanging overhead. The walls were bare except for a few old photographs and a cracked mirror. Sit down, Reed ordered, his voice quieter now. He wasn't looking at me, but at the small table in the corner, as if something was waiting for him there. The air felt thick, charged with something I couldn't place. I sat at the table, my heart thudding loudly in my chest. It was impossible to ignore the feeling that something or someone was watching. Reed pulled out a manila folder from his jacket and laid it in front of me. This is your mother's file, and yours. Everything you need to understand what's really going on. I reached for it, my fingers trembling. As I flipped through the papers, one name caught my eye. Holly Beck, a lawyer I'd never heard of before. Beneath that was the word trust, and underneath, an amount I couldn't believe. $1.5 million. What is this? I asked, feeling the weight of the words settle in my gut. That's the trust your mother set up for you, Reed said, his voice lower now, measured. But it's been under lock and key for years. They didn't want you to know about it. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but they didn't make sense. Why had my mother hidden this from me? And why had she kept Reed, my real father, out of the picture? I closed the folder, feeling the weight of the documents in my hands. There was something about the way Reed was watching me now, something guarded. Victoria wasn't just hiding your inheritance, he said, taking a seat across from me. She was hiding something else. And I don't think you've seen the whole picture yet. You're not just running from her now, Amelia. You're running from something bigger. I swallowed hard, the air in the room, thick with tension. What do you mean? He leaned forward. Your mother's death wasn't an accident. And that envelope you gave her today? It wasn't just about your trust. It was the key to something much darker. The door slammed open. Both of us turned, instinctively, and Reed's hand moved to the gun under his jacket. But it was only a shadow, someone coming through the door. The figure in the doorway was tall, cloaked in a long coat. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Reed, the voice growled. You've been too damn careful. I knew that voice. I'd heard it before, on the other end of my mother's phone calls. Detective Harris, the man who had been watching my every move, lurking in the background. The man who had connections to both Victoria and Reed. Harris didn't move. just stared at Reed for a long moment before looking at me, his eyes calculating, assessing. "You don't want to do this," Reed said, his voice low but firm. "I don't care what you think I want," Harris snapped. "This is bigger than you, Reed. You've been running things from the shadows, but not for long." I stood, my heart racing. "What's going on? What's happening?" Harris stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He looked at me like I was a piece of the puzzle he hadn't quite figured out yet. "Amelia," he said, his tone more casual now, "do you know what's in your mother's will?" I shook my head. I didn't want to know, but I couldn't stop myself from asking. Your mother's death wasn't just a simple tragedy. It was planned. Every single thing that's happened to you has been because of this. He pulled out a thick, sealed envelope from his jacket, slamming it on the table in front of me. I felt my breath catch. The seal was broken, the contents ready to spill. But before I could reach for it, Reed stood, blocking my view. "Get out of here, Harris," Reed growled, his voice low and threatening. "Not until she knows the truth," Harris said, smirking. "The truth about what's really coming." The room grew still. The air felt suffocating, heavy with unspoken threats. "You're in the middle of something you don't understand, Amelia," Harris said, stepping closer to me. "But you'll figure it out soon enough, just like your mother did." I reached for the envelope, but Reed grabbed my wrist, pulling me back. His eyes were cold now, calculating. "You don't want to open that," he said. And in that moment, I understood. The truth was already too dangerous to face. I wasn't just running from my past anymore. I was running from the very people who had created it. The snow was relentless, beating down on the cabin's windows as Reed and I sat in the dimly lit room, the only light coming from a flickering lamp above. My hands shook as I stared at the envelope in front of me, the sealed one Reed had warned me about. Inside, the answers to everything. Answers I wasn't sure I wanted anymore. Reed hadn't spoken since Harris left. The air in the cabin was thick with tension, like we were both waiting for something to break. I tried to focus on the envelope, but my mind kept racing back to the moment in the woodshed. Victoria's eyes, the way they flashed with panic when she saw me holding the sealed envelope. It wasn't just about the trust anymore. It was about the lies. All of it. I could hear Reed shift in his seat, his breathing steady but sharp. "You have to understand," he finally said, his voice low. "Everything's been set in motion for a reason. You were never supposed to find out. Not yet." I felt my heart pounding. Then why now? Why bring me here? Why reveal it all? He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Because you're already too deep. This isn't about the trust, Amelia. It's about your mother's death. And you're in danger because of it." The room went silent. My breath caught in my throat. "Danger?" I whispered, more to myself than to him. Reed didn't flinch. His eyes stayed on mine, cold but certain. "Someone's been controlling this game from the start. They want you gone, Amelia. They'll do anything to make sure that happens." I didn't know if it was the weight of his words or the tension in the room, but my body felt like it was suffocating. The walls were closing in on me. I looked back at the envelope. Everything was in there. The truth. The key to all of it. But there was something in me that knew if I opened it, if I knew it all, I wouldn't just be running from Victoria anymore. I'd be running from everyone. The sound of a phone, vibrating on the table, broke the silence. Reed glanced at it, then back at me. I could see the way his expression shifted, like a sudden wave of realization. "That's the signal," he muttered, grabbing the phone with urgency. I leaned forward, trying to see who was calling. He swiped the screen with a quick motion and answered without speaking. For a long moment, he didn't say anything, just listened. I could see his jaw tightening, the muscles in his neck flexing. Finally, he hung up. "Who was it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Doesn't matter. We're leaving." "Leaving? Why?" Reed stood up suddenly, grabbing my arm with surprising force. His grip wasn't violent, but firm, like he was trying to hold me in place. Because they're here, he said, his voice cold, distant. We need to move. The door slammed open. I barely had time to react before I heard footsteps. Loud, quick, purposeful. Reed's body was already in motion, pushing me behind him as he reached for something hidden in his coat. I felt the cold metal of a gun pressed against his side. My chest tightened. Reed, what the hell is going on? I whispered, panic rising. He didn't answer. Instead, he shoved me toward the back door. Go. Now. I moved before I even thought about it, rushing through the cramped cabin, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't know where we were going, but I knew that staying was not an option. Not anymore. We burst into the night, the cold air biting at my skin as we ran toward the woods. The trees seemed to close in on us, a wall of darkness surrounding us. Reed was ahead of me now, moving quickly, his pace relentless. Behind us, I could hear voices, sharp and angry, getting closer. They're coming, Reed said through gritted teeth. Keep running. I had no idea where we were headed, but I kept running, my feet slipping in the snow. The forest felt endless, every step further from safety. My lungs burned, but I didn't stop. We couldn't stop. Suddenly, Reed skidded to a halt, grabbing me by the arm and pulling me down into the snow. I stifled a gasp as I hit the ground, my heart racing. We're not alone, he whispered, barely audible over the wind. I turned my head, my breath catching in my throat. There, in the distance, were two figures emerging from the darkness, moving with purpose. They weren't police. They weren't anyone I recognized. Just shadows. Reed's eyes darted toward me, and for a brief second, I saw something in his expression. Something I hadn't noticed before. Fear. Get up, he whispered urgently. We need to move. Now. The chase was relentless. Every breath I took felt colder than the last. The figures in the distance were closing in, their footfalls crunching loudly in the snow, like the sound of doom. Reed was ahead of me, but even he was struggling to keep up. My legs were numb, my hands shaking from the cold and the adrenaline. Just as I thought I couldn't run anymore, I saw a faint light ahead, the outline of a building, faintly glowing through the trees. My body pushed forward, my mind no longer questioning why or how. But as we neared the building, the figures behind us started to run faster. They were almost on top of us now. Then the world seemed to freeze. A shot rang out. My heart skipped a beat as I spun around, instinctively ducking, but the bullet didn't come for me. It passed just inches away from Reed. The sound echoed through the trees, deafening. And then everything went still. Reed stood frozen, his eyes locked onto the shadows in front of him. He didn't move. He didn't speak. It's too late, Reed. A voice called from the darkness. The truth was unraveling faster than I could run. The blizzard outside howled as if trying to drown out the silence inside the cabin. Reed and I stood motionless, both of us listening to the faint sound of crunching footsteps outside. Every nerve in my body screamed to move, but I knew better. The game had changed, and there was no turning back. Get down, Reed whispered, pushing me down to the floor with a quick, forceful motion. I barely had time to react. The cold, hardwood scraped against my palms as I hit the floor. I held my breath, my heart hammering in my chest. Through the thin slats of the cabin's window, I could see shadows moving outside, creeping along the edge of the woods. It was them again, the people who'd been following us. Who were they? Who were they working for? And why hadn't Reed told me the whole truth? I could feel Reed's eyes on me, his body tense, ready to spring into action. But his face was pale, his jaw clenched tight, as if he were holding something back, something important. The door creaked open slowly, just a sliver. I could see the glint of a flashlight beam cutting through the darkness outside. The figure paused, a shadow standing still, watching the cabin like it was a trap to be sprung. For a split second, I thought we might be caught. Then Reed made his move. He was up before I could blink, bolting toward the door in one fluid motion. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice low but sharp. "Don't move until I say so." I didn't argue. I couldn't. The tension in the air was suffocating, and I wasn't sure what was worse, sitting here and waiting, or stepping into the unknown with Reed. The seconds felt like hours as I waited in silence, the cold creeping into my bones. My mind was racing, every thought pushing against the walls of my skull. I knew Reed wasn't telling me everything, and I wasn't sure I could trust him anymore. But if he was trying to protect me, he wasn't doing a very good job. A loud crash interrupted my thoughts. The door had been kicked open. A man's voice shouted something in the distance. Reed's voice followed, low but firm, as if he was trying to hold the line between us and them. "Stay behind me," Reed said again, his tone almost a growl. But the chaos outside told me everything. He wasn't in control anymore. I stood up, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I could hear footsteps now, heavy, deliberate. The sound of boots crunching against the snow outside grew louder. They were getting closer. I grabbed the envelope on the table, clutching it like it was the last lifeline I had left. It felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my hands. Then, just as quickly as it had started, everything went quiet. I didn't move, couldn't move. The fear that gripped me made it impossible to think straight. Then came the sound of the door slamming shut again, followed by the sound of footsteps retreating into the night. Reed came back into the cabin a moment later, his expression unreadable. He closed the door behind him, locking it with a soft click. "They're gone," he said, his voice taut. I didn't believe him. I couldn't. Something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me. The tension was still thick in the air. "What the hell is going on, Reed?" My voice cracked, but I didn't care. "Who are they? Why are they chasing us?" Reed didn't answer immediately. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing across the room like he was weighing his options. Finally, he stopped and turned to face me. His eyes were dark, haunted. "Your mother wasn't just hiding the trust from you, Amelia. She was hiding everything. The people coming after us, after you, they've been tracking your every move since the day you were born. They're part of something much bigger than you think." I felt my chest tighten. "What do you mean?" Reed stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Your mother's death wasn't an accident. It was planned, and everything that's been happening since then, it's been orchestrated. All of it. For you." I took a step back, my stomach lurching. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying they're after you. You've been targeted. Your mother's will, everything she left behind, was a lie. And you're the key to something they'll do anything to control." The weight of his words sank in slowly, the terror creeping up my spine. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but all I could do was stand there, frozen. Then Reed dropped the bombshell. "You don't just have a trust, Amelia. You have a birthright." A birthright. The words felt wrong, like they didn't belong in my world. But something in the way he said them made the room feel smaller, the air heavier. "What are you talking about?" "Your real father," he began slowly. "He's not who you think he is, and neither is your mother. They were both part of a much larger plan. A plan you've been unknowingly part of since the moment you were born." My heart skipped a beat. I wanted to deny it, to turn away from the truth, but I couldn't. I was too deep. "You're not just some girl with a trust, Amelia. You're the reason this whole thing started. You're the reason they're hunting you." A sharp knock at the door cut through the tension. I froze, eyes wide. Reed's face went pale. "Stay down," he whispered, reaching for the gun at his side. I couldn't breathe. The knock came again, louder this time. Someone was on the other side. Reed's eyes darted around the room, calculating, as though trying to decide whether to fight or flee. The door rattled again, this time with force. Then came the voice, a deep, gravelly sound that I recognized. "Reed," the man outside said, "I know you're in there." I didn't have to hear more. I knew what was coming. Reed had been hiding the truth from me all along, and now it was catching up. The room felt colder the moment Reed stopped speaking. The finality in his words hit me harder than any bullet ever could. They were after me. The truth, it seemed, was not just dangerous. It was a beacon for every enemy I'd ever had. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to demand more answers, but Reed was already moving, his eyes scanning the room with a calculated calmness that unsettled me. "We can't stay here," Reed said, his voice clipped. "Get your things. We're leaving." I barely moved. My mind was still reeling, trying to process the weight of what he'd just dropped. A birthright? What did that even mean? And why hadn't Reed told me any of this before? "Amelia!" Reed's voice broke through my haze, sharp and insistent. "Get up. We don't have time to argue." I stood, my legs shaky, and grabbed the envelope off the table. It was heavier now. Heavier with all the things I didn't know, things that could tear my life apart. Reed had already started packing a small bag by the time I made my way to the front door. My mind was still focused on the outside, on the people who were following us. They were close now. I could feel it. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, like I wasn't alone. The sound of a car engine hummed in the distance. It was a deep rumble, familiar. My heart skipped a beat. Reed noticed, his eyes flicking to the window. "Stay down," he whispered urgently. "We've got company." I'd barely had time to react before Reed pulled me down behind the couch, his hand over my mouth to silence any noise. The room seemed to shrink, and for a moment I thought I could hear my heartbeat louder than the engine outside. Every sound felt magnified. The car stopped. It was close, too close. The door opened, and the sound of boots crunching in the snow reached us. I wanted to look, but Reed's hand on my wrist stopped me. "We can't make a sound," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The footsteps grew closer. The door to the cabin creaked open, and I held my breath. A shadow passed in front of the window, and then silence. I could feel the sweat on my palms, the air thick with anticipation. Whoever was outside knew we were here, and they weren't going to leave until they found us. Reed's fingers tightened around my wrist. "We need to move." I nodded. He motioned for me to follow him as he quietly moved toward the back door. Every step felt like a lifetime. My breath was shallow, almost silent, but the fear clamped down on my chest. I could feel the pressure building inside, threatening to burst. Just as we reached the door, the sound of a voice froze me in my tracks. "Reed," the voice said, low, familiar, too calm for comfort. "I know you're here." It wasn't just any voice. It was Detective Harris, the same man who had been watching us for weeks. The same man who had followed us through the night. Reed cursed under his breath and pulled me back into the shadows. We crouched low, hidden behind an old wardrobe. I could barely hear Reed's breathing above the pounding in my ears. "They're here to clean up their mess," Reed muttered to himself. "They're going to try and kill you, Amelia. If they find us, they'll do whatever it takes to keep the truth buried." I looked at him, confusion and fear swirling inside me. What truth? What are they hiding? He didn't answer. Instead, he peered through a crack in the door. Harris was in the room now, his boots heavy on the floorboards. "Come out, Reed," Harris called again, his voice smooth, like he was having a casual conversation. "You've been running long enough. It's time to face the consequences." A chill ran down my spine. "I don't know how you've kept your head this long," Harris continued, his voice dripping with malice. "But I promise you it's over. The game is done." I felt Reed's hand tighten around mine, his grip ironclad. "Stay down. Don't make a sound. If we can get out the back, we'll make it." But just as Reed began to move toward the back exit, the door slammed open. "Too late," Harris sneered, stepping forward with a gun in hand. "I'm not here to negotiate, Reed. I'm here to finish this." Everything slowed. Time seemed to stretch as Reed grabbed my arm, pulling me behind him. I didn't know what was happening, what was real anymore. The gun in Harris's hand gleamed in the dim light. "Stay down," Reed hissed. I didn't know what to do. There was no escape. I could feel the cold, the oppressive weight of the truth bearing down on me. The gun in Harris's hand was pointed directly at Reed's chest now. "Let's not drag this out," Harris said, his voice so calm it made my stomach churn. "The only question left is whether you're going to make this easy or hard." Reed didn't answer. His eyes were locked on Harris, his body tense. He was waiting for the right moment. Then came the shot. It wasn't at us. It wasn't aimed at Reed. The bullet struck the wall, just inches away from Harris. For a moment, everything was frozen. Harris turned, startled, his eyes scanning the room. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And that's when I saw it. A shadow in the doorway, standing perfectly still. A figure I didn't recognize. Reed's face twisted in shock. The figure stepped forward into the light. "I think it's time we end this," the man said, his voice cold, deep and unfamiliar. He was wearing a long coat, his eyes hidden under the brim of his hat. Everything changed in that moment, and for the first time I realized I wasn't just a pawn in a game. I was the key. I stood there, frozen, as the figure in the doorway stepped closer. The room was so quiet, it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. The man's face was hidden under the brim of his hat, but there was something familiar about him, something I couldn't place. Reed's body tensed beside me, but he didn't reach for his gun. Instead, he stepped back, slowly, as if he was expecting this moment. "You should have stayed out of this, Reed," the man said, his voice gravelly, filled with something dark and final. I didn't need to ask who he was. I already knew. This was the one who had been pulling the strings all along. The man in the doorway wasn't just another shadow in my life. He was the one who had orchestrated it all. He was the one who had been keeping secrets. The one who had made sure the truth stayed buried. "Why, Reed?" I asked, my voice shaking with both fear and anger. "Why didn't you tell me?" Reed didn't answer immediately. His eyes flicked to the figure in the doorway, then back to me. His jaw tightened. It was never supposed to happen like this. The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken history. For years, Reed had been my protector, my savior, but now I saw him for what he truly was, a man caught in a web of lies, just as tangled as mine. The man in the doorway stepped forward, and the weight of his gaze fell on me. "Amelia," he said, his voice too calm, too sure of itself. "You don't know what you've been dragged into, but it's too late to turn back now." I felt the walls closing in. The air in the room grew thick, heavy with the weight of what was coming. I couldn't escape. The truth was going to destroy everything. "You should have known," the man continued, "that this wasn't just about your trust. This was always about control. You were always the key to something much bigger." Reed took a step toward him, his eyes narrowing. "Stay back," he said, his voice low. But the man just smiled, his lips curling into something that didn't quite resemble a smile. The tension in the room snapped when the man in the doorway pulled something from his coat, a flash drive. He tossed it on the table between us. "This," he said, "is everything. Your mother's final act. The last piece of the puzzle." I stared at the flash drive. The last piece? My mind raced. What could possibly be left to uncover? Reed moved toward it, but I stopped him. "No, I want to know what's on it." I reached for the flash drive before he could protest. "You don't understand what you're asking for," Reed said, his voice strained. But it was too late. I was already plugging the drive into the old laptop on the desk. The screen flickered to life, showing a folder labeled Final Disposition. I opened it. Inside were files, dozens of them. One stood out, Case File Morrow Family. I clicked on it. The words blurred together as I read through the file. My head spun as I pieced together the information. The conspiracy, the deaths, the stolen money. Everything my mother had been hiding. Everything Reed had been a part of. But it wasn't just about money. It was about control, about power. And the worst part, the truth wasn't just buried in these files. It was buried in me. Your mother didn't just die, the man said, watching me as I read. She was murdered. And you, Amelia, are the reason she was killed. You were a threat to everything we've built. I felt the floor beneath me give way. The words hit like a punch to the gut. You're lying, I whispered, the tremor in my voice betraying me. This isn't true. None of this is true. But the man's eyes told a different story. He was telling the truth. And now everything made sense. Reed's voice was hoarse. I didn't want you to know. I thought if I kept you in the dark, you'd be safe. But it was never that simple. The weight of it all crashed down on me. I wasn't just the victim here. I was a pawn in a game I hadn't even known existed. The man's hand reached for the gun tucked into his jacket, his fingers brushing the handle. I instinctively took a step back, my heart racing. Reed's eyes flicked to the door, then back to me. You need to leave, Reed said, urgency in his voice. Now, there's no time. I didn't understand. What's happening? What are you going to do? I'm not who you think I am, Reed said quietly, the weight of his words sinking in. But I'm trying to fix this. I'm trying to protect you, Amelia. I could feel the tears welling up. Everything had been a lie, and the truth that I thought would set me free was just another chain, pulling me deeper into the darkness. Before I could respond, the door slammed open again. This time it was a flood of people, armed men, detectives, surrounding us, cutting off any escape. We were trapped. The man in the doorway smiled. Game over, Reed. I stood frozen, the reality of it all sinking in. But then, as if in slow motion, Reed's hand shot out, grabbing the gun from the man's coat. The world seemed to stop, time suspended in the air. The sound of the gunshot rang out. But it wasn't Reed who fired. The next few moments were a blur. Screams, shouting, sirens. I couldn't process it all. In the end, it was the truth that killed them all. The truth that set me free. I sat alone in a room. No more lies, no more games. The world was quiet now. The storm had passed. Family isn't just blood, I whispered to myself, recalling the words my mother had once written in her letter. It's who stays when everything falls apart. And in that moment, I realized family isn't about who you're born to. It's about the ones who choose to stay, even when the truth hurts. The truth had set me free, but freedom came at a cost. And now it was time to rebuild.